Most beloved Minnesota Vikings players of all time, Harrison Smith, has agreed to a contract restructuring and is back for his 13th NFL season with one team, the Minnesota Vikings, after considering retirement, after considering playing for another team. He is back. He restructured his contract and is going to play for the Minnesota Vikings at least one more season. This take is presented by Hokeland Farm. Contact Jared at Hokeland Farm at 952-491-1541 for rotationally grazed, 100% grass-fed beef. This beef is sold in quarters and halves, and they also have custom sample packs so you can try before you buy in bulk. You get 20% off if you tell Jared you heard about Hokeland Farm on the Minnesota Tim podcast. So everybody's excited about Harrison Smith coming back for another year. The leadership qualities, his love for Minnesota is obvious, and that this is his second time in his career that he has restructured his deal so that he could play for the Minnesota Vikings. He must love it in Minnesota. He's one of us. He loves playing for the Minnesota Vikings. And I just need to be honest in this podcast because Harrison Smith, like many other Minnesota Vikings fans, is one of my favorite players in the organization's history. And he will go down as that when his career is all said and done. But we must be honest about this. Harrison Smith has lost a step in his game, and it's very clear. Smith does not have the speed that he used to have, and this isn't a knock. You should not be offended when I say this, because he's 35 years old. He's supposed to lose a step or two at this point in his NFL career. I can't help but wonder if the Minnesota Vikings should have explored other options at safety before bringing Harrison Smith back. And maybe they did, and there weren't other good options. But maybe they didn't, and they just wanted that leadership quality, the guy that's a staple in the Vikings locker room with a bunch of new defenders. Now, last year, Harrison Smith had a phenomenal game against the Carolina Panthers, totaling 3 sacks. And he also played well against the Chicago Bears the first time. But those 2 phenomenal games by Smith were at the time against 2 bottom feeders in the NFL. When you put Smith up against the higher end offenses in the league, Smith did not play as well. I compared it to an average basketball player dominating against some scrubs in pickup games. He's not actually that good, but he looked good because they were facing a crappy team. Now, can he have a moment or two throughout the NFL season where you see a play and it's like, okay, this is the Harrison Smith of yesteryear? Yes, every single good player that's ever played in the NFL has moments. But you can see that Harrison Smith's moments have dwindled. And according to Pro Football Focus, Harrison Smith's overall grade was 68.9. And when you compare that against the best safeties in the league, Antoine Winfield, they had pro football grades of like 90. So Harrison Smith is nowhere near one of the top safeties in the league anymore. Now, he's a good blitzer. He's good at disguising what he does. Aaron Rodgers has talked a lot about that. But I would have been more pro for the idea of seeking another option to replace Harrison Smith. Not because I don't love Harrison Smith, but because he has lost a step, and it's pretty clear and obvious that he has lost a step. Now, maybe it will look different next year because the Minnesota Vikings defense was not very good last year. The scheme was great, but the Vikings defense eventually got exposed. Now, with the new defenders that they brought in, Greenard, Van Winkle, and Cashman, will Harrison Smith fit better with a better defense surrounding him? Maybe. Or with a better defense around him, will the offense specifically go at Harrison Smith because it's clear and obvious to them as well that he has lost a step? Now, Brian Flores, his scheme, everybody loves it. It's fun, it's fancy, it's blitz heavy. Will Harrison Smith flourish for a second year in that same scheme? Maybe. But I still would have been more pro looking for other safeties around the league that are quicker, that can do similar things as Harrison Smith. Maybe a guy even in the draft that could do similar things as Harrison Smith. But, I mean, at the end of the day, he will go down as one of the greatest Vikings of all time. But also at the end of the day, he's slower than he used to be. He's not as effective as he used to be. And I don't think anybody should be offended over that, even though they love Harrison Smith as a player. Because I love Harrison Smith as a player, but I still have the evaluation eye to say, hey, you know what? He's not the same player he was. And nobody should be offended over that, because this is his 13th NFL season, and he's 35 years old. When Kevin Garnett, one of my favorite players in NBA history, came back to the Minnesota Timberwolves, he was not the same player he once was. He's slower. He's not as athletic. Same thing for Harrison Smith. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please rate, review, and follow this podcast wherever you are currently listening to this podcast.